Welcome to the show, The Deal That Got Away. I'm Meg Mishak. This is Nick Thicket.
And this is the deal that got away, a weekly series where we go deep dives into prospects and deals that slipped through our fingers and applying those lessons to deals working on today. Normally, we'll be featuring some of the best and brightest in the biz, and I'm sure you'll recognize a few names.
Each week, we will also have a real seller on the show who brings us a real deal or prospect. We're going to be coaching live. So this week, we are featuring Oswaldo Restrepo, who has a deal that was supposed to be a softball, so a really easy win. It was a referral from our current client who acquired a company, and they thought it was just going to be as easy as, an introduction, a couple of meetings, and contract signature. But that didn't happen. So everything was going well until they got the client or the prospect into a POC, and they have not heard from the prospect since. I think that we've all had at least a variation of this scenario, prospects that have gone dark during a pilot or, easy wins, client referrals, acquisitions. So we're really excited to dig into this deal. But we want to start this first episode by just introducing you to ourselves and the show, really letting you know what to expect from this series as a whole, and especially the why behind it.
Mm. Thanks, Meg. When we first started talking about this is something that I really went deep to try to figure out why I actually cared.
Mm.
And the thing that hit me is everybody keeps telling me, Meg, it got harder to sell. And I'm going to push back on that. I think it just actually got harder to buy. There's way too many lookalike products. It's really hard to prove value. There's so many more people that are getting involved. People are so iffy on price and always want to change things or negotiating in emails. I'm sure you'll have something to say about that later, but I think this is why the traditional approach to prospecting just fails. It's because you need to be the detective that's uncovering that case through with, the twists and turns to make sure a deal's actually worth winning in the first place, profitable, and making sure that case is won long before you ever pick up the phone. That way, for me, I'm building serious momentum where I know it's going to close. And I can hand it off to someone brilliant like the wonderful Megan to carry it across the finish line.
Yeah, and I do believe that it is harder to sell and buy in the market today. And as a coach who focuses more on discovery through negotiation, it doesn't get easier when you have deals in your pipeline. I hear a lot of sellers say that they feel stuck in the world of sales today. Not only stuck deals, stuck in the pipeline, stuck in procurement, things like that, but also overall stuck in their careers. I think a lot of us have been kind of following what we've been told to do in sales, right? Where we're told to do all these things. People say that it works because it worked for them. And a lot of those strategies are not working today. And
Mm.
unfortunately, what we're seeing is a lot of people, they want to get to the next level, whether that's a promotion or a different role or a better role, but they really don't know how to get there. So, what we want to really think about through doing this show, why it was really exciting for me, is to help sellers gain more clarity and awareness on why we really win or lose deals, what really is happening.
And Meg, and if those deals are actually even worth winning in the first place.
Absolutely. So before we bring on our first seller, we want to go over a quick overview of what to expect from this show. So each week we'll feature a seller in the trenches with a real deal that needs help. On the weeks that I host, we will be focusing on active opportunities in the pipeline.
On my weeks, we'll be focusing on the most important part of sales, prospecting, of course, and how to really get into those accounts that are untouchable. And we'll be handpicking guests that have the expertise and the know how that have been through those challenges that you're struggling with and who will be coaching through the entire deal. And as we'll be sharing their story about how they learn what they know and show you that it's not just theory.
Yeah, and we'll also at the end of the show be opening it up to Q&A from the audience. We will also be exploring just some of the biggest questions that we see or some of the biggest pitfalls related to the themes that we're seeing on the deal. So definitely stick around for a lot of tactical advice and really thoughtful questions. So before we let's go ahead and just give us a quick introduction to ourselves as well, Nick. So tell them who you are.
One of my favorite nicknames that I ever got, and I almost should go and put in my LinkedIn profile, was the digital locksmith. But I like to think of myself like Sherlock Holmes, the detective. My focus is really on that research and validation to make sure that we're working on the deals we should win more often than not. And honestly, winning long before we start.
Yes, and I really embody in my business and my sales the magician archetype. My focus is on really making it easier for you to win and win big. I inherently am a very lazy salesperson. I hate wasted effort. I hate spending any time that does not matter. So for me, it's really about focusing on what are those key behaviors that we can leverage that will have the most impact on your deals, both positive and also negative. So, want to also introduce our guest. So, on the show today, we have Oswaldo Restrepo. Can we bring him on? Hello there, Oswaldo. So good to have you on the show today. Can you tell us a bit about your experience and your role today?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on. My name's Oswaldo, and I live here in Jefferson City, Missouri with my wife and daughter. I'm a former Army officer, and I've been in sales for about 5 years now. I first got into sales back in 2019 when I left the military. I've been doing it ever since, and I really love what I do. Right now, I work for a London-based tech company called ITRS Group, where we focus on IT infrastructure monitoring for clients with very large and complex IT estates. And my current role is enterprise account executive for the US Central region.
Hmm.
Love it. And I was really excited to have you on this deal. You're on the show. You're incredibly smart, and I'm really excited. You brought us a pretty interesting deal. I think when we were going over it, I was just like smiling. I was like, "This is such a good one." So we shared a little bit about this deal. I think that we've all had situations like this where there's a lot of really interesting themes here. There's, a what was supposed to be a layup, which was, even the client who was referring us in told us that it would be no problem. It was almost like a formality of having all these meetings, right?
Mhm.
So I already have like a few themes that I'm kind of pulling and picking at, which I'm excited about. But I always love to start with a little bit of a self review because I don't know about you, but I hate getting like torn apart and you're like, dude, I know all of this. So, as well, tell me a little bit about how you're thinking about some of the challenges you're facing and especially some of the root causes that you want to kind of go through in coaching today.
Sure. So specifically here with this deal, maybe I went into it thinking it was going to be too easy. I went into it expecting, okay, we're going to go in here, have a few meetings, we're going to close it, sign some paperwork, and that's it. But yeah, it turned out to be a lot more complicated than that. I'm just struggling to really figure out what happened, where the breakdown in communication occurred, um, and what I could have done better.
Yeah. So I'm curious if there are any audience questions. Like, if this were your deal, what would you be thinking? Or also the audience, like, what are some of the themes that you're kind of hearing in this deal in terms of what went wrong, what could have gone better?
I always got
Let's see.
Jonathan Cote in the audience, Franklin, Chris Bogue, Andrea. What's the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear this? As Oswaldo was explaining it, as Meg was talking about the deal, what is your big question? Where would you start to go and peel apart this mystery Not quite the murder case, but the deal that got away. What would you ask? I will say there is a little bit of a delay. So it's usually about 5 or 10 seconds
Mhm.
for people to go and see this. So it might be a moment. I might have some
No worries.
fun music just for a comedic break. It's thinking very hard.
So there's a question. Why do you think it would be easy? It's a good one.
Ooh,
Ooh,
that's a really good one.
Well, um, the our champion for this opportunity was an existing client, and he explained the situation to me. He told me that they had acquired a company, and they wanted that company to implement our software. So he endorsed our software to the prospect, and yeah, I thought it was just going to be easy for that reason.
great question.
Yeah, such a good one. Cool. So I have two big questions that kind of were the first ones that came to my mind. So I think the obvious place that a lot of people would start is the POC, right? Because you told me that everything was going well until the POC, and I want to dig into that as well. But I think I hear this a lot when we have clients go into a POC, and especially Oswald, can you tell us a little bit about like how the conversation went around the POC? Because my big question is, how did we approach the POC, and how did that go?
Well, our intention for the POC was that we would walk through it together, um, but the prospect had a different idea. So he's a senior platform engineer, so he knew what he was doing when it came to setting up the IT environment. So he just wanted us to be very hands off. Um, so we figured, all right, this is his POC. Sounds like he knows what he's doing. We'll just let him run with it. So we just took a step back and we put together a 7-day software key. He would have 7 days to do whatever he wanted. And we just let it run.
Yeah. So I think that we've had, I don't know about y'all, but I've had a lot of these situations that I've seen over the years with people who POCs are always really tricky. People, I don't know about y'all, but especially with when it's a POC, it's like they either like don't use it, or it just like brings up more questions, or they just like don't understand. It's a lot. There's a lot of pressure on a POC, and especially interesting. I think a POC is the place, demos and POCs are the place where I see like the curse of knowledge in sales really impacting us. The curse of knowledge is basically very simply that we forget all of the knowledge that we have. So, especially when we go into like a platform and we're showing it to people, it's like they've never seen it before. And we think it's really easy and intuitive. But also, there even think about my iPhone. I literally every time I get a new iPhone or there's like a new update, I always go into the like these are the new features because it's not intuitive and there's so many things that are hiding, you know. So with the POC, I think it's really there's two things that strike me here. One, even a senior engineer, I'm curious like what were some of the goals for the POC? There's a few things for me when it comes to a successful pilot or a successful POC. What are you trying to achieve through it? And I think a lot of times we approach it as just like let's just jump in and play around and like, play in the sandbox. But especially when we're just like trying to get a feel for it, a lot of times that can bring up more questions than answers. So I'm curious. I have a few ideas here, but I want to get Nick's perspective. But I'm also curious, Oswaldo, when it comes to the POC, I know we talked about a few things. Like, any ideas for how we could have like handled that differently? I know that you're kind of kicking yourself as well already with
Mhm.
this. What do you?
Well, I think that we could have insisted on taking an approach where we worked together for the POC instead of letting the prospect just do whatever he wanted during the 7 days. And we tried checking in with the prospect multiple times throughout the 7 days, and we just couldn't get a hold of him during that time. So I think we just should have set the expectation at the beginning that we would be doing it together.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what does working together on the POC typically look like for you?
Well, we would schedule multiple meetings throughout the duration of the POC. I would be involved. Our engineers would be involved, and we would go through and troubleshoot different things, look at their environment, make sure that the integrations are working properly, things like that.
Okay, so a little bit more just like guidance and working with them on it. So I have a few ideas as well about how we can even make this a little bit better. Nick, what's your perspective on this specific aspect of it in POCs?
So Ryan, I'm going to pull this up because Ryan kind of hit close to what I was thinking is what was the relationship between the referring party and the recipient? Was the recipient actually the decision maker? And I'm actually going to get pushback on that. Was the recipient the person actually living in the workflow? So not only people in the trenches, but the manager that was going to be basically going to bat for it. Did you talk to them before to understand what you were proving?
Well, it was my understanding that the parent company, which is my existing client, had a lot of power in the relationship, and that the end user, who was this senior platform engineer, would be reporting directly to my contact, who was the champion at the existing client's company.
Okay. And before you started, since this is an ongoing business case, how are you going to show value or calculate it or?
Well, they had a few very specific goals in mind that we uncovered during the discovery call. And we explained to them how we could help them achieve those goals through the use of our software. We demoed it to them, and it just came down to the proof of concept to actually show them in their actual production environment what that would look like.
And I'm curious, what were some of... Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add to this. Upgrades in the area, and unfortunately, they haven't upgraded yet. They've down. The reason ones is tech love numbers that are comparable. So if I was think of it like if I was buying into an investment portfolio, and you said it's a 10% return. So if I'm spending 10 grand, I'm expecting to get $1,000 back per year. What I was trying to get to is what's your proof? If it's, and you don't have to give me all the details, but I just wanted to go and explain where my thought process was, because I found that when I go to managers and then go up to directors and VPs, we can go back and like, hey, we thought this, but actually in the proof of concept, this, and this came out. So this is actually could be an even better investment than I initially thought. So I just wanted to go and loop that in because I find that really helped me. It just took me a very long time to figure it out.
I want to take a step back though. Can we highlight Charlotte's question? So were there any politics involved? Now, I don't know if y'all have ever gone through an acquisition, but one thing that struck me that I wrote down was when we went over, when you were talking about the parent company acquiring this company, you're like, oh, they wanted them to get it. That scares me because I think that it's really interesting. I've seen a lot of situations here where, you know, with acquisitions where they don't really want it. They feel like they're just pressured into it. For example, a lot of times when there's our acquisitions, the parent company wants you to use all the same technology. I think a lot of people have actually been through that scenario and you're like, what we're doing today is fine, So I'm also really curious, like I feel like there might be some tension that we're not aware of, right? With the acquisition. And also I think that this is an opportunity when we think about the champion. There's two kind of concerns that I have. End users are tricky, and you can let that question go. Um, End users are tricky because, yes, they are the ones that are using the technology, but a lot of times there's challenges there. And it actually comes back to Nick's point around the metrics, where a lot of times end users are not the one, they're the ones that are the most familiar with the day-to-day pain, right? Especially around like efficiencies and processes. They're very aware of those things. They're the ones going to be using the technology, but they're not usually the ones that are making the decisions. They sometimes can, veto, but they also aren't as much like aware of like the why behind it. So I'm just really curious, like all of these kind of thoughts are just coming to like, was this even the right person? And are there some of those politics because of this acquisition that like, do they actually, does this end user want this, or is this person sabotaging it because they don't really want it and they just want to stick with the systems that they're using today?
That's a great point. There may be some politics there that I'm unaware of. Um, you may be right. I don't even know how I would begin to dig into what some of those politics are. I don't know if they would want to disclose any of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So for me, I do it with humor. I love, getting these people. I think there's two scenarios that you have, right? I think there's a lot of sellers who would basically go into a deal like this and they would be like, okay, I'm going to latch onto the powerful person and going to this person's going to tell this person what to do, right? So I just need to like they just need to kind of like
Mhm.
check the box and everything. I think that like building multiple champions is critical in any deal. And how I would turn this person into
Mhm.
a champion is almost like a little bit of humor. And so I would probably get this person on a call and be like, "Hey, so I've heard that that this we have this client and they're really successful using the tool, but I'm sure like I'm just really curious like what are y'all doing today? And it sounds like this is something that's coming from up on high and I've been in that scenario before and just curious how you kind of feel about it. Is there an opportunity, like my goal here is to really listen to your concerns and your process and hear really how we can kind of solve some big things for you. So I think turning this person into a champion themselves is also critical, not just kind of seeing them as like, oh, this person said that this person has to do something, and they're just, that doesn't feel good to anyone.
Mhm.
Nick, any ideas there? And I'm also curious, like, I want to dig into the metrics a little bit as well.
Yeah, that was the first thing that my brain went to is like what did you assume about the problem? What did you assume about the solution? And what did you assume about implementation? And I usually pick out three and I switch prospecting into research and action. But my big thing I would want to watch is so you got acquired. This company got acquired. Is it their first company they got acquired? And what happened after? So
Mm-hmm.
because I come from investment banking, a lot of the time companies will buy an element and they'll gut it and they'll a lot of the times they fail because they actually kill the business model. They don't
Mm-hmm.
understand how the business works. And you can probably guess why they do that is they're trying to go and reduce cost, their run rate. So
Or they're
that's
trying
why
to, I think, like gain consistency.
mhm.
And a lot of times the companies are being acquired don't don't care about consistency. They're like, our processes are pretty good themselves.
Mhm.
Oh, and that but
Um,
that would play into why I would ask, like, why did they buy the company? I'd want to know.
yeah.
And what I would try and do, but it's really hard, and you'd have to be very careful on timing if it's been publicly announced that they were acquired. Is if it has, that I would talk to both managers on both side of the fence and see why. Like, how are they going to work together? What's the communication going to look like post acquisition? How are they going to, and figure out that because that would give me guidance into what might the future look like.
Yeah, I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I think it'd be fun to actually get a little bit tangible and tactical. So can you share a little bit more about the goals? You know, some of the goals that they shared, and I'm curious, like, I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions.
Mhm. Well, their main goal was to be able to be FedRAMP certified, to be able to sell to the federal government. And in order to do that, there were several custom integrations that needed to be created. And that was what we were going to prove that we could do by using our solution.
Mhm. So when it comes to that goal, was that a goal, do you think, primarily of the parent company or also of the company that they like the new client?
Well, I suspect that that goal was proposed by the parent company
Mhm.
because the majority of the parent company's business comes from selling to the federal government. So
Nick, what do you
this
think?
may not be a goal that originated from the prospect company.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well because do you also see the big gap? If they're not bought into that goal, if
Mhm.
that's not valuable to them, then especially even when we're thinking about a POC in terms of a proof of concept is literally like what are we proving? If they didn't want that goal in the first place and they're just like tinkering with the software to do something that they didn't really want, then they might have just been wasting time, you know? Nick, what are you
Yeah.
thinking?
And this comes just from my investment banking experience because this is what I used to do. Is I would want to go and ask the advisor that's selling it. I'd go and network in if I could. So a lot of time on LinkedIn, if you go and look and find mutual connections, sort by industry, you can find who the investment advisor was, especially on the senior people if you're connected or close to. And what I would ask them is on the company they're acquiring, what is their proof of concept? What is their investment horizon? How are they scoring this if it's a success or not? Because then if I understand what the objective is of buying that company, back to kind of what I was saying earlier, but I would try to hear from three different people: the advisor,
Mhm.
somebody in seniority at the acquirer, and somebody at the company being bought. And I find that when I have those three heads together, I can triangulate the truth because they won't tell me it point blank most times.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting here as well is I think a lot of us have had situations where there's multiple stakeholders and they don't all have the same goals,
Mm.
right? And that's really tricky because even when it comes to the metrics and everything, the metrics do not matter if they're not aligned goals, right? Metrics are kind of a secondary aspect, but metrics can help when we're also mapping value, right? When we're like, if this really matters, let's figure out like how to map it down to those end users, you know? What are they doing today that we can almost help them be a champion to them to kind of show, okay, like these are the challenges that we're struggling with and this is how it maps to that broader challenge of even the parent company. But I think
I
if we need to do that mapping.
I'll take that a step further typically when I'm running my business case, and I actually will go and write out. So if they got rid of the tool and they were doing it manually, what does that jobs to be done look like? How long does it take? Is the quality the same? Okay. Now, going to Jonathan's question, I would do another
Mhm.
scenario.
Yeah.
What if they switch to a competitor? What could it look like? Is there a competitive advantage, an API, security, some piece that will increase the ROI instantly? And so I give three scenarios in my head of, okay, doing nothing, going back to getting rid of all software altogether and just running their existing process, which hopefully they have one. Another thing I
Mhm.
double check if they switch to a competitor or if they continue to use you. What's the ROI?
And let's actually think through that tactically. So Oswald, do you know if they like are they using a tool today? What does that look like? Let's talk competition.
They have been thinking about using a competitor
Mhm.
of ours. That's something that they've been tossing around. They're still just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. So it also one of the things that is kind of coming to me, it seems like they also don't necessarily know exactly what they want out of any tool, right? In medic, we call this the decision criteria. And when we think about going into a tool, ironically, sometimes we do skip over this. Most of the time, we are very good at like, digging into the technicality, the functionality, like all of the little things. But we take it from a very interesting perspective. We take it from a very subjective versus objective perspective. We assume that they just like should want our technology. But one of the things that I think can help, especially with POCs, is really doing a deep dive of what is on their wish list. And also, I think realizing they don't know, right? Um, I think one of the challenges that a lot of sellers have not bought any like tools. And I think that is the challenging part for a lot of salespeople is that like I come from the world of sales enablement and sales training and sales leadership. I've bought tools before. And for me, I don't know the goal. I mean, I think I know the goals of what I'm trying to achieve when I go into these. I usually don't. And I'm like, wow, okay, this was very helpful, very clarifying. I also don't like, I have a kind of a wish list in my mind. I don't even know if these are like realistic things that I can do, but these are the things I want. Right? But a lot of salespeople don't before we go into here's what we can do and here is, the POC and all of the cool things that we can offer. Actually taking an objective workshop with them, really going
Mhm.
through what are the things that you're looking for. And I think the fear here is what if they say something that we don't have? Well, what happens when that happens? One, maybe it's something that no one has. But the thing is that people need to realize is that most people's wish list is truly a wish list. Most people's wish list is not going to be solved by any company, but it's more about like trying to find like the company that has the majority of it. And also when you go into that wish list and you have like what I call I don't do demos, I do solutioning workshops, getting really collaborative with the client and like even changing the name of it. I also have pricing workshops, by the way, super valuable,
They
but
work
really
really
getting
well.
into, yeah, also, Oswaldo, this is one thing that came to mind when we were talking about the POC. I think that like when we think about, oh, we need to be involved in the POC, what does that involvement look like? Because what I'm hearing is just a lot of like, oh, like kind of reactive. Let's answer questions and work with them on it. But I think having really like a workshop before saying, what are the things that we're going to be wanting to test in terms of mixed metrics and the goals that we want to really figure out? What's the functionality that we want to assess, get a feel for, give feedback on? And, there's a few aspects there, like what are some of the concerns and worries and questions that we want to answer through the POC? If you get those 3 things before you go into a demo, a POC, anything, you're gonna be a lot better off.
Mhm.
Those are proactive versus reactive. And why I say they're proactive as well is because it also is competitive. Because if you can also like really get them to when you do this solutioning workshop, when you can say where they're like, oh, this is my wish list, and you're like, oh, one thing, have you thought about this? This is something that our clients find really valuable and really important. That like those are your differentiators, also creating some of that competitive differentiation to get them thinking about the things that should be on their list.
Mhm.
So how do you think that could have changed the conversation a little bit, even when we going into the POC? Because also it gives you a little bit of leverage to push back when they're like, "Hey, we want a POC," and we're like, Hey, so we're really excited about that. Before we go into POC, in any POC, we want to make sure we answer these three questions. So, because honestly, we can do a lot with our technology, and it's really hard usually for clients to just jump in, and if we don't know what they're trying to actually assess. Is that fair? So it gives
Makes
you
a
a
lot of
little bit
sense.
of leverage versus, "Hey, we just wanna be there with you, like, we want 5 meetings, and we wanna, like, answer all your questions," and they're like, "Dude, that's a lot, like, we're good.
Mhm.
We don't want." But having that just gives a little bit more clarity. How do you
Mhm.
feel about that?
Yeah, I think that would have went over well. I think that would have helped them and helped us. So I
Mhm.
think that's, yeah, definitely something I could have done better.
Yeah. That's
I
totally.
I have I have a game for everyone, and I wanna hear in the chat. So it's kind of on the lines of which came first, the chicken or the egg. So when I started in software, working in software sales, coming out of investment banking, private equity, venture capital, I had the strangest realization that blew me away. And going into whether you're like on the combat front or whatever, if they told you nothing, sent you out into the field, told you look at your watch or whatever device they gave you, that it's just going to guide you, probably would be pretty uncomfortable, right? Well, what I started playing this game when I was prospecting is which came first, the process or the technology? And if you had to guess, and there's no wrong answer here, which do you think came first?
I'm getting, like, 2001, like, A Space Odyssey vibes, like, I'm definitely getting some, stick using monkeys, so I don't know, that's a good question. Oswaldo, what do you think?
No,
Audience, what do you think?
I think there was always a point where the technology didn't exist. I think the
Mhm.
process was there first, and then once the technology was implemented, the process was updated, and then after that, the technology was updated, and it's just a continuous circle.
I have, an option C. I think the goal was first, you know? Like, what were we trying to achieve? Then the process was created, then the technology was created as a way of streamlining or bettering the process. So I think that it's really interesting as well because this goes back to, again, like, really preparing people for POCs and for that process. We need to make sure we have the goal that they're trying to achieve through it so we can, again, test it. But also, it brings up a lot of ideas around also just a really good understanding of, like, the why behind things like training during a POC. Because if we can better understand what their process is today, what they're trying to test, setting them up for success is really critical.
I have one takeaway and one action that I would like to throw in. And Oswaldo, if you want help with this or you want to go and follow up with me later, I'd love to hear how this went. But what I would do is I would reach out to either side of the fence and I would say to them, hey, one thing we've been working on internally is a lot of customers are struggling with the process. So the tool isn't getting the best bang for your buck. If I had a detailed process that you could throw into your manual, do you think that would be helpful? Because a lot of hiring managers never got training. They never get support. They get barked at when things aren't going right. And what they don't have is someone in their corner fighting for them. And I have a
Mhm.
sneaking suspicion that if we position ourselves to be in their corner and help them, especially with that process, because they don't know, or even they don't even know how to use that technology to coach either. If you could take those two together and just tease out a message to go and initiate that conversation, I think there's a strong chance you'll get a response and at least put, closure to what the heck.
Mhm. Mhm.
Nick is a little
Oh, oh, maybe we lost Meg. Uh-oh.
Oh,
And my
Well, while we're waiting for Meg, she should be back in a moment. What do you think, Oswaldo? Oh, and Meg, are you back?
Yep, I think so.
That was weird.
I was making fun of you for being frozen.
Oh, I was one that was frozen.
Yeah, I think so because I was confused. Yeah. But you had a really good frozen face. Don't worry. I should have screenshotted it.
You should have screenshotted it. That would have been
Yeah,
a good
but
post.
I actually have I would love to go to a tactical like okay, how I think we went into a lot of like how we could have done this differently. I do want to pause on Chris's question really quickly and then we can actually go into like how could we solve this? Yes, so I really love what Chris asked. What do you think the directors will say? Do you think there's a reason they wouldn't want to do this? So one of the things that I do that's literally so easy, I wish that just more people would do this, is proactively uncovering objections. And I think when
mhm.
we use the word objections, it feels very salesy and very like, I need to like, please do not ask people their objections. But at the end of every single meeting, what I typically do, and to the point where my clients now, my prospects are always like, okay, like here are my questions, and um, simply ask, hey, so I'm just curious. It seems like there's a lot of positivity here. Love to hear that, but I am curious. What are some of the questions and concerns that you have at this point? I'd be honestly surprised if you didn't have any at this point. And just there, a lot of people use the question, how many, raise your hand if you have ever asked the question, do you have any questions? I hear this all the time. If you can literally just do this, not that, what questions or concerns do you have at the end of every single meeting? I think that like it's a little bit scary, especially I'm a sales trainer, so when I'm selling my services, it's myself. So when I'm basically like, what concerns do you have about me as a person and a trainer? It's very vulnerable, but you get incredible feedback. So I think
Mhm.
they're really asking those questions. And you saw also how I turned that into the third question that I would be asking in terms of going into a POC. What questions and concerns do we want to really answer and address during the POC is going to be critical. So, Chris, really good point. Thank you for asking that. But if it's okay, would love to switch to how can we re-engage? And Nick, I'm going to pass this off to you because the master of prospecting. How would you actually get this going again?
When
Oh,
I
wait, can we give a little bit of context? Like, what is the last time we heard from them? Because it's kind of entertaining.
So I haven't heard a single thing from the prospect ever since our discussion about the POC. I tried calling and leaving messages and emailing, didn't hear anything. But I reached out to my existing client, the champion, and he told me that they were still evaluating the solution and they hadn't made a decision yet. So I still haven't heard back from the prospect.
And it's also very interesting to me how the parent company, the champion of the parent company, at first he was like, oh, it sounds like he was like, oh, I have the power. It's just that my decision, they're going to be using it. He's my
Mhm.
report. But then when now it's like, oh, they're still trying to figure out if it's a good solution. I was like, oh, so the power has shifted a little bit, right? So Nick, what do you think?
when I was talking earlier, did my full message come through, or did I get stopped midway?
I don't
Uh,
know.
When I was talking about how I would re-engage previously, when I was talking about the
yeah,
process, did that
you
Yes.
that went
froze
through?
halfway through your statement.
But I'm curious, like, yeah, just any other ideas to re-engage and also just like kind of the full spectrum of re-engagement.
So what I do is it's kind of a weird thing that I've found that comes from investment banking was I first figure out how do they make money. And I'll just give you kind of like an overview and just so that it makes sense what I'm going to ask. So what's their business model? How are they creating a market? How are they delivering value? And how do they capture a little sum for themselves? And then the next thing this is all in my head, a theory is, okay, what is their vision of the future? Where do they want to be in 2 years? How can I find out? Where can I find hints? So this is what guides my research and my detective work. And then the last piece is reality of implementation. What's the reality that we can actually do this? Are the risks manageable? Can we minimize them? What does that look like? And so to do this, I do something called mapping the earthquake. And I know a few people here will find this familiar. But in an earthquake, most people would think when in sales that we're going to go for this, the mythical decision maker. But in an earthquake, the biggest impact isn't the initial boom. It actually comes after. And so it's the aftershock that you actually feel. So what I do is I map out the epicenter, where's the impact felt, and how does it ripple through the organization? Not your product, but the problem that you're solving. And so most people will go after director, VP, C-suite. I'll be honest with you, they have no freaking clue what's going on most of the time. But the people in the trenches are living through the pain. They feel it every day. It's frequent and it's high impact. So they have incentive to do something about it. And we just have to find the one that's passionate enough that they care. But the thing that we mostly don't do is what comes before it. So if we're looking at where the biggest impact is, what comes before the process that your end users live in? So I'll give you an example. So say a company tells me that closing deals is an issue or they don't have enough pipeline. So what I could do is I could go to sales development and marketing and see what their life looks like. So for you, what might come before you that could impact that process?
Uh, the prospecting.
For what you're selling, you would for your product, might be the prospecting.
Let's see. Well, the problem, the pain point, is what comes before the solution.
But so with your IT, with your work, with your end users who's actually using the product, if we thought of it like an assembly line, Megan puts puts the box on the table, I put the top on it, and you put the door on, and there's a house. If I'm having problems getting enough houses built in a day, and I realize that I'm showing up late for work every day, so everybody's waiting for me to go and put my piece on, so we're late, and that's why it's not working. This is why I go down the assembly line to figure out what's going on. So what would be the step in that process before you?
Doing a thorough discovery of and trying to just figure out why they're looking for a solution.
Yeah, and I would even look at like who the managers interact with. How is that process moved through the company? Like, is it IT, cybersecurity? If there were a company that's all in-house, then cybersecurity is not a big issue, so it'd be different. But what I'm trying to do is tease out. I know Megan has said this previously about the 2 to 3 use cases. And what I'm trying to find is the 2 to 3 value points and entries. So, and this is why I'm saying to reactivate, what I try to do is find more options so I can go fishing. Because if my first, spot is not working for me, I lose momentum and then it falls. But if I find 2 or 3, so I'm going after sales development, I'm going after marketing, I'm going after CS, and I'm going through the full line, you can take those assumptions that you had about why the deal fell through or why they ghosted and go to the ones that care.
Yeah, so I'm definitely hearing, I love just making sure we have, so for me, what resonated there was making sure we're talking to the right people and also that we're solving the right problem. And I definitely think that kind of weaves in what we've been talking about all throughout this session of making sure that eliminating some of those assumptions, and especially with this champion, really understanding what he's trying to achieve, what the problem is, what the goal is, right? The goal, the process, the technology. And my final question is, I mean, on a very tactical basis, Oswaldo, so for you and the audience, what are some of the biggest takeaways? What do you want to actually implement and take action on?
Well, what I'd like to implement is making sure that we're really uh, addressing the issues that are important for them, especially when we're doing demos or POCs, and just making sure that we talk about those up front, and that we came prepared with having those identified already.
Yeah. Taking it from just playing in the sandbox to this is what we're going to be testing. Now let's actually apply it.
Right.
Yeah. And I am curious when it comes to moving forward, any ideas for, and I'm curious the audience as well, any ideas for how we should re-engage? Because we haven't heard from them, the POC, we don't know how it went. I want to hear from the audience. Just give a quick minute. How would you approach this? And as they're typing it out, Nick and myself, maybe we can give like super tactical, how would we reach out to this prospect?
I would go on
Nick, to
LinkedIn.
you?
I'd find that senior architect that you did the POC with. I'd figure out who they're connected. I would go and do a general Google search on their name and see where they're active, what channels they play on with different roles. It could be Discord, it could be a numerous one. So that's why I start with a Google search. And then I figure out who they trust, see who they're connected with, and I reach out to 5 other people. And I just start there. I'm like, hey, I know so-and-so did this POC. I'm just curious, did they say anything about it? Do you think it's actually something that's worthwhile? Like, put your messaging about teasing out what actually happened. And I would just start there. And then maybe the other thing I talked about, the process, is go and re-engage the manager and just say, hey, we have this written a lot, like I was talking about, a lot of people are struggling to go in with the process. We have this written down process that you could actually throw right into your manual if you're interested, and see if like that process is top of mind, because that might be the reason why it's hard to prove value. So just those 2, that's all I would try first.
Yeah, so for me, it really goes back to what we've talked about a lot, which is going back to the value. I think a lot of times we as sellers are like, hey, just following up again, wanted to see, and this question literally came up. I had to go and see if it was you as well, or that we were talking about this in coaching where, I do one-on-one coaching with clients, and definitely came up where it's like, how do I re-engage? I've tried over and over. So one of the other strategies, so love Nick's initial, like try that first. One of the other things that I find works really well actually is to send them something unrelated. Start a new thread and be like, hey, had this case study come up, or I saw this event, curious if you're going. Just something totally unrelated, because a lot of times, sometimes it can actually be that they're just like busy and they didn't see, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've literally had people respond to something like that and they're like, oh my goodness, your email is sitting in my inbox. I know, I'm so sorry. I went on vacation. I wasn't able to get back to you. So I think there's also one of the other strategies I would think about is executive outreach, really leveraging your relationship with that, with the person that we met with previously, or also even having someone from the technical team reach out to them. If this is a more technical person, have someone other than you be like, hey, saw that you've been playing around in the POC. Was curious how it went. Having someone like a solutions consultant or engineer reach out. So just a few other ways of really getting creative. So I think we are wrapping up in the final few minutes. Nick, I would love to cover just what's next from the show and what people can
Hmm.
expect.
Well, first, Oswaldo, thank you so much for volunteering. Like, it's never an easy thing to come on and speak,
Yeah.
a bunch of people and have a big open conversation where you never know what someone's going to ask. So thank you. It means a lot to have you here.
And thank you for
And
the audience. So many incredible questions. Really, really good engagement. Loved seeing what y'all had to add.
yeah,
That's
thank you,
brilliant.
everyone. It's nice to see some familiar names as well. It means a lot to have you here as well. But what's coming up? Well, next week, and I bet you we've all had this before, went to go and activate a deal and get met with crickets. They can see the emails are being opened, but they can't get through on the phone. People are connecting with them, but no conversations are being started. This is a huge deal that wouldn't just make their quarter, it'd make their entire year. But it's Fort Knox and it's impossible. And we're going to dive in next week.
Ooh, so exciting. And like we said, we're going to be switching off between Nick's weeks, which are going to be focus on the prospects. I love someone said like the impossible deals, the impossible prospects you maybe got a response from but cannot get into. My week, I'll be hosting another very similar conversation like this, where we'll be leading a large deal, one of those deals that could make or break your quarter. And we're going to try to make sure that it doesn't break it. So, by the way, if you are a salesperson, a BDR, even a sales leader, you want to get involved, we are going to have some co hosting spots available as well. All you have to do is message myself or Nick, and we can send you a questionnaire to complete, and we'll just get you on the slot. So, if you want to be in Oswaldo's position next week or following weeks, let us know. We're going to be doing this every week for the foreseeable future. And I think the final thing is if you do want, I know we're up on time, if you want a little bit more help from me or Nick, we can tell you a little bit about how to work with us. Nick, do you want to start?
Yeah, if you're sick and tired of going through podcasts and reading books and you just feel like you're getting stuck and sales apprenticeship seems to be a dying art, go to b2bpowerhour.com or go to LinkedIn, shoot me a DM if you need help with prospecting and opening those accounts consistently. Hey, it could just might make your career.
I love that. And for me, Meg Mishak, I do a lot of one-to-one coaching. Swaldo is actually one of my clients. We're working together on very similar topics like this. So if you want a little bit more support getting to the next phase of your career, if I actually work with both new sellers as well as tenured sellers who've been selling much longer than I have, reach out to me. I do a lot of content on LinkedIn. We do a lot of engagements like this. And of course, there's always the good old posts. So message either of us if you want a little bit more support. We're always willing to help.
And if you
With
message
that,
one of us too to be a guest or to go and
yep,
co-host, we'll send you a form to get you inside.
we're
Well,
excited to see everyone in the following weeks. Hope
thank
you
you
have
very
a good
much,
day.
everyone. Happy
Bye,
prospecting.
y'all.